Good evening and welcome to the November 18th, 2024 session of the Lake Forest City Council. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Tack.
Here.
Alderman Novit.
Here.
Alderman Clements.
Here.
Alderman Notes.
Here.
Alderman Powers.
Here.
Alderman Gushgarian.
Here.
Alderman Levin.
Here.
Alderman Weber.
Here.
Alderman Walder.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. First item on the agenda is comments by mayor. I'd like to start with noting that I had the opportunity to watch last week's Plan Commission meeting in its entirety. It was a good example of how the city process works to optimize outcomes for the entire community. The thoughtful and respectful nature of the commentary from the public and the commissioners was particularly notable. The conclusions and recommendations of the Plan Commission do not, however, provide an effective pathway forward to achieve the goal of improved and uniform telecom connectivity throughout the community. On this basis, tonight I will ask the council to table the recommendation of the Plan Commission for 120 days. During this period, I will direct engagement of an independent telecom consultant to address the following issues. First, the uniformity of telecommunications coverage in Ward 4 and throughout the community as a whole. Second, identify solutions and actions that would be required to provide uniform state-of-the-art coverage to the city of Lake Forest. And finally, to clarify the currently applied technologies within our community and identify opportunities for technology upgrades that would enhance service, perception of safety, and visual character of the system. It is notable that telecom services, although essential, are not city-owned and operated infrastructure. Future improvements are dependent upon private investment. It is our role to provide a regulatory pathway that encourages such investment to the benefit of the entire community while protecting the interests of residents as well as the unique culture and character of the entire city. As this matter will be returning to council upon receipt of the consultant's report, there will be no discussion or public comment on the Plan Commission recommendations this evening. That being said, we will now move on to comments by City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Good evening. I have one item under my report tonight, and that is a department spotlight. And the timing is appropriate given some of the actions over the last few months. Clearly, it has been identified by the mayor and the City Council to prioritize city communications and community engagement. That was evidenced by the establishment of a distinct priority area to this topic within the city's recently adopted strategic plan. And consistent with that, the council will certainly recall that as part of our budget development process last year, the city centralized existing staff throughout the organization into one consolidated department of communications and community engagement. And because we're at about the 6-month now mark from that change, I thought this would be a good opportunity to ask our Director of Communications and Community Engagement, Dana Olson, to give an update on that transition and some of the projects that the department's working on. Dana?
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of City Council. I'm excited to be here tonight to talk about our Communications and Community Engagement Department, the longest title of a department in the city. Just rolls off the tongue. Before I get started, I wanted to introduce you to some of the folks on our team. So pictured here, it's me, and then Kristen is next to me. She's our Communications and Marketing Manager. She focuses on messaging and marketing. Next to her is Thais, who's our Graphic Design and Social Media Specialist. Kristen and Thais were formerly part of the Recreation Department, but as City Manager Wisha mentioned, they became part of our centralized communications department earlier this year. And then peeking over Thais' shoulder is Ashley Love, who is our part-time communications specialist. And if you receive the weekly e-news, you've seen Ashley's work in action. So as a department, we have our own initiatives, but largely we serve as consultants for the other departments within the city to help them get the word out about their programs and initiatives. And so we get to shine a light on the work that our different departments do. So we help with website updates, videos on social media, invitations, print materials, and also photography to document events and meetings and to share those across our channels. So one thing that I want to make sure you walk away with today is knowing how we use data and analytics to inform the decisions that we make within our department. And so up on the screen is a graph showing the results from our community-wide survey last year. We asked people where they get information from the city. And so we're the engagement department, so I have a couple of questions for you this evening. Any guesses for what some of the top ways people get news and information from the city, the platforms, the sources of information? Email newsletter, great guess.
Website.
Website, thank you, Alderman Powers.
Social media.
Social media. Interestingly enough, social media didn't rank as high as we would have thought.
Cocktail parties.
You know, that we classified that as word of mouth, but that did definitely come in on our rankings here. So,
The board signs at the
yep,
outside.
posters, the community boards, yep. The police blotter is a way people get information, not one that we highlight particularly, but is a source of information. So it's a little small up there, but those top three are all within 72 and 75%, and the top one is the city's website. The second is our quarterly dialogue newsletter, which is our print newsletter that's mailed to all residents. And then the third one is email newsletters. And so this information was interesting to us and useful to know that, you know, the print newsletter still is valuable and people like to get their information there. And we've used the data that we have from our email newsletters to inform what we put in the dialogue seasonally. Since we have a limited amount of space for the dialogue, we want to make sure that we're sharing information that people need to know. So we look back at our email newsletter, most popular clicks from the quarter last year during the time of the newsletter, and make sure we're including those stories. Website is knowing that it's the #1 source of information for people. We're currently doing a refresh of the city's website, refreshing the brand, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then email newsletters are up there on the top of the list. And so some others, word of mouth did rank #4, which again was an interesting data point, one that, you know, word of mouth could mean dinner conversation with friends, running into somebody when you're walking your dog, or it could mean, you know, somebody sends a screenshot of a social post or forwards an email. And so that's one that we want to dig into a little bit more. But posters and signs around town, also popular. Social was a little bit lower than we would have thought, but I think a lot of this content that we share on social, we're directing people back to the website or to some of these other sources. And so that's, as we're prioritizing our time and resources, something that we keep in mind. Lake Forest Now mobile app and other social media pages, our blog, and some other sources here. So rather than walk through all of the different ways that we, those different channels we just talked about, I thought we could do a case study walking through a recent project to share how we shared information about it with the community and just provide some examples. So when we did the water main replacement at the intersection of Deer Path and Green Bay Road, we sent a letter out to residents. No, you can't read that there, but it is a letter that we mailed to nearby residents and people along detour routes so that they knew what to expect. One of our mantras is no surprises, and so we want people to know what to expect, especially with construction projects. We had a dedicated web page on the city's website that was easy to find from the homepage, and so that was where we shared a lot of the more detailed information about the project. We put it in the email newsletter, and one point with the email newsletter that I forgot to make was we have close to 12,000 subscribers for our weekly e-news, and so that is a great way for us to reach our residents, and we routinely have open rates around 60%, which is a really good, it means we have thousands of people who are reading that message each week. We put up signage in the project area. We sent out push notifications through the Lake Forest Now app, and we shared on social before the project started, while it was in progress, and then when it was finished, so that we can show progress, not just saying, hey, this is happening, now it's done, but to show people, you know, we know there's an inconvenience, bring them along the way to show that we're making progress. And with the water main, we did a survey after it finished to ask people, how'd we do? We know there's some more construction activity planned on Deer Path with the streetscape project. And so we asked people, how did you get information about the project, and is there anything else we should know for next time? And so you'll see most popular ways people found out about it was the e-news, signs in the area, website, and social. And so we had around 70 people take this survey, and there were some good substantive comments that we'll keep in mind as we're creating the outreach plan for the Deer Path Streetscape project. So one of our initiatives that we've been working on since we officially became a department earlier this year was creating a more cohesive brand identity for the city. We're made up of many departments with very different functions, but we want to show our residents that we're one organization. So one of the tools we use for that is the Dialogue newsletter, and we recently incorporated that layout and design into some other materials, most notably the strategic plan, with which Jason mentioned earlier. Our other print pieces like postcards, things like that. And then the main one where we'll be bringing this brand throughout is the city's new refreshed website. And so I have a little sneak peek for you here to show what the new website will look like. And so very similar to what we have now with a big image, beautiful image at the top. We have no shortage of beautiful images here in Lake Forest. We have expanded icons here to include links to what we know are some of our most popular pages on the website. And we have the ability to change these out seasonally. And so if we know certain times of year, certain types of information is more interesting to people, or like around Halloween, trick-or-treat hours, very popular. So we can change that out seasonally as well. Prominently featuring news here. This is where we share information of things that people need to know just so they don't have to go digging on the website. And then calendar, opportunities to stay connected, and then how to connect with us on social. And so we're excited to roll out the website early 2025. We're moving through the design phase and making some updates to the content, but we're looking forward to sharing this new website with the community. And when we do that, we'll be asking for feedback on the design to make sure that it's working well for folks, because our goal is to make it easier to navigate on a desktop and also from a mobile device, since we know about half of our website users are using a mobile device, and things look look different when you're on a big screen versus when you're on a small one. So community engagement is in our lengthy department title, but is an important part of the work that we do. So just wanted to touch on a few of the community engagement initiatives that we've shared this year. I see aldermen pointing. You might see yourself in some of these pictures from our Coffee in the Park with Your Alderman this fall. We had some chat with the chief sessions to introduce our new Chief Burke. So when we do engagement events, we try and meet people where they're at. And so there is a place for a public meeting in a public building on a weekday evening, but we know that that's not always accessible, or people aren't available for those. And so we've been doing meetings in parks on weekend mornings to make it easier for people to stop by, fold it into their routine, or when we were doing the master planning for Northcroft Park, having meetings at Northcroft Park, having some incentive. We did pizza and planning to try and make it easier for families to stop by on their way to other activities. And another element we've used to remove barriers is having online surveys. Again, not everybody can make it out to a meeting, but we can share a survey online that reaches a broader audience and allows people to weigh in on the decisions that are happening in their community. And so I wanted to touch on real quick one survey that we've done recently regarding the playground at Forest Park Beach. Did anybody take this survey? Great. So the city staff worked with the playground consultant to come up with some different options that were comparable in cost for a new playground at the beach. It's time to update the playground. It's 20 years old, and that's about the end of its useful life. And so we shared these two options with the community for feedback late this summer, and we had over 570 people weigh in, which was excellent. And with that, we also had over 780 substantive comments that those people made about the playground. So we took that feedback to heart and used that to come up with a new design. The most popular option was option A, which was more nautically themed. And so this final playground, or the updated playground, reflects mostly option A with some elements from B. incorporated. And then there was other themes that we heard from the community related to increased accessibility for children of all abilities, more sensory play options, and more climbing features. And so we heard that feedback, and those are reflected in this updated design. And so right now we have yet another survey for folks to weigh in, review the updated playground, and let us know if there's anything we missed or if they have any other final feedback. And so I like to end every presentation with a reminder of how you can stay connected with us. There's 2 pieces up here I didn't go into much detail on: our Lake Forest Now app, which is where you can get push notifications and information from the city, and our Lake Forest Love blog, where we share stories about city residents, businesses, staff. It's a really wonderful platform that we use to get stories out there because we have such wonderful stories to share in this community. But the point here is there's a lot of ways to stay connected, and we hope that you do. So I could go on talking all night about communications, and I will say a quick plug for Lake Forest 101, which is where we go into take a deep dive into some of the administrative departments in the city, including communications and community partners. So if you are hungry for more, you can sign up for that in the spring, and we'll go a little bit deeper into all of these. But at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there questions?
I actually do.
Alderman Oates.
Thank you, Mayor. Dana, it was a great presentation. To the point of the social media and say Lake Forest Now apps, which I think in all of our minds are shocked to see them as low as they were. Have you come up with any ideas on what might be driving that or how to improve that?
So when we dive into the demographics of the survey, it's reflective of the community, but our survey respondents skewed a little older, and so that demographic tends to like more print documents, and so that isn't necessarily surprising that the dialogue was a way people like to get information. But one of the things with social media that we're interested in doing a pulse survey on to dig deeper is, you know, maybe you didn't see information on the city's page, but like your friend shared it or it was in a group that you're part of. And so that's something we want to dig a little deeper to, because we know from our data that we have strong engagement on those platforms. But it's also part of our strategy is to put our information out there everywhere. And so we customize our message for our different platform. What we put on Facebook is going to be a little different than Instagram, which will be different from LinkedIn. And so we keep our audience in mind and make sure we still blast our information out on all of those platforms. But we, you know, try and keep in mind that, you know, dialogue's really important. Website is super important. And that's not to say we're gonna stop posting on social or anything, but it's just helpful information for us to know of how people are getting their information.
Very good. Alderman Powers.
More of a comment than anything. Dana, thank you very much for all you do. You're the first to show up, the last one to leave, oftentimes when we do a lot of these communication sessions. But I think what you and the team do the best is the follow-up with the residents that have visited and provided input, which is incredibly important, right? Because then they know they've been heard. Mm-hmm. You can ask qualifying questions, and then you can keep them kind of on a short list. I know from everything from Northcroft Park to what we're doing now at Waveland and a lot of the other things that we've done and communicated, the team's been fantastic. So keep up the great work, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we call that the feedback loop. We like to, when we get feedback from people, and the playground is a good example of that, is we say, you know, we want people to know their feedback is being used and it's valuable. And a way that we can do that and help build trust is show them, like, hey, we heard you. Here's what we changed as a result. And then it helps build trust within the community and credibility as well.
Other comments or questions? Okay, my last comment is I think you do a great job, and I would have to say that I think in Lake Forest you almost have to work at not learning about things. It comes at you in so many different directions, and so again, thank you for that. Communication is the key to the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christina.
All right. The next item on the agenda is the opportunity for citizens to address the City Council. Is there anybody who would like to address the City Council at this time?
I missed like the first minute and 30 seconds. My friends would give me notes.
Excuse me, are you going to make a comment? Do you want to talk? If so, then come on up to the... dais and state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Lexi Vrasha. I live at 1345 Kimmer Court in Lake Forest, Illinois, 60045. I just wanted to say I missed the first minute and 30 seconds, and I didn't want to talk out of turn, but my friend did give me notes and said that we were not able to ask questions about the meeting moving forward on 11/13. I just had one question, that's all. But if it's not permitted, I don't want to cross a line.
Did you have a comment? I mean, generally, it's not a question and answer session. If you have a comment that you would like to present to the council.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to say something if it wasn't allowed, basically. Okay. My comment would be, I was at that meeting on 11/13, and I do understand that we are tabling that discussion. My comment would be, through talking to other communities that have faced difficult situations like this, where you have conflicting points of view, usually a advisory committee is put together that consists of a land use attorney, a realtor, a fireman, and a fourth ward resident that can all contribute in this committee to provide an accurate opinion and consultation and expert opinion to put forth in front of city council. So to better equip them with knowledge, so it's not just one third-party consultant that may have a biased or swayed view, a collaborations of citizens, and that was my comment. But it was my question, but I guess it turned into my comment, so
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is committee reports. We're going to have a report from the Finance Committee. The first item is consideration of an ordinance restating and reaffirming ordinance number 2013-070, the debt self-limiting ordinance. First reading. This is presented by Elizabeth Hollab, Finance Director.
Thank you, Mayor Tack. Before I start into the first item, I just want to note for the audience and those who may be watching from home that last Tuesday evening, the City Council Finance Committee held the first of 2 budget workshops for fiscal year 26. Last week's workshop focused on 5-year capital improvement planning and revenues. You spent about 3.5 hours talking in detail about a number of the items that are coming back to you this evening that are revenue related for first reading and then for final approval on December 2nd. So with that, the first of those 4 items is indeed the property tax self-limiting ordinance. So under Illinois law, a home rule unit of government is not subject to the property tax extension limitation law. The PTEL, also known as property tax caps, was imposed in the middle 90s as a measure to keep property taxes from increasing at a significant amount. And so in 2004, the city was putting before the voters a referendum seeking home rule authority by referendum. And in advance of that referendum, the city council at the time adopted an ordinance indicating how the property tax extension limitation law would be addressed for the city if the city moved from a non-home rule unit of government to a home rule unit of government. That ordinance has been amended twice, in 2008 and 2013. So I have a summary here just of the current ordinance under which the city operates. The ordinance separates the levy between the debt levy and the aggregate levy. The aggregate levy is essentially everything other than debt, and sets forth the guidelines on how the city will limit property tax levy increases in light of its home rule status. So you'll see that on the debt levy side, we limit the debt levy and capital improvement levies currently to the 2004 debt level, inflated each year by the Municipal Price Index, which is a measure of public works contracts in Illinois and how that inflation is impacting public works projects. And then on the aggregate levy, you see quite a bit of language regarding intent to abide by the property tax cap with some specific exceptions, specifically capital improvements for the city and replacement of revenues lost through the state process where state share revenue has been reduced, such as with income tax distributions being reduced from 10% to 6% several years ago. So these are the guidelines under which we currently operate. Over the summer, the City Council considered and did approve the purchase of the 1925 Field Court building for a future police facility. At that time, it was economic conditions that were presenting a very unique situation for the city and an opportunity to move forward with that project with significant savings due to the office environment. At the time, we looked at the debt side of the cap, which is this graph where we look at by levy year. In red is the pre-2023 debt being paid by property taxes. The green is the debt service associated with Deer Path Park improvements, which were bonded last year, and blue is the capital improvement levy. And those three items are added together and compared to that debt cap, which is adjusted each year by the MPI. So at the time, we brought to the council this issue with acknowledgement that if the project proceeded, debt associated with a police facility would require some form of amendment to the self-limiting ordinance. So we had quite a bit of discussion about that last Tuesday evening at your budget workshop. We looked at several different models, looking at a prospective $19 million bond issue for police facility improvements. This is an estimate. As you know, design has just begun. We're about a year away from knowing what those actual costs are going to be. But for now, we're using a $25 million estimate, $6 million from current revenue sources and $19 million from bonding, just for discussion purposes. We talked also about maturity options of 10 and 15 years, advantages and disadvantages of looking at different models. And what this does is this looks at the 15-year model on the left side, layering the police facility debt on top of the current limits. And on the right side, looking at the potential option of removing the capital improvements levy from the debt cap and instead shifting that to the aggregate levy cap, which is consistent with truth in taxation and reflects the fact that the capital improvement levy is more of an ongoing operating type of expenditure because they are capital improvements that are recurring in nature, such as street resurfacing, which you do every single year. So based on the significant discussion from the Finance Committee last week, the direction of the Finance Committee was to come back with an ordinance amendment that would move the capital improvements levy to the aggregate levy cap, recognizing again that that should be funded from ongoing annual revenues because it's an ongoing annual expense. It is also consistent with truth in taxation. We talked about that we also have to meet a truth in taxation statute when we adopt our property tax levies. The capital improvement levy is considered part of the aggregate levy for the truth in taxation statute. And then the debt cap would be retained as it exists, but the only items applicable to that debt service cap would be debt service levies as abated each year. So with that, we have that amended ordinance before you this evening and are requesting that you consider first reading of that amendment, of that ordinance amending the debt service cap. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Director Holub? No? Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment on this matter? Okay. Seeing none, then I'm going to ask for a motion to grant first reading of an ordinance restating and reaffirming ordinance number 2013-070, the debt self-limiting ordinance.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Kashkarian.
Aye.
Alderman LeVert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walter.
Aye.
Alderman Novit.
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. The next item on the agenda is also presented by Director Holub. This is consideration of an ordinance establishing the 2024 tax levy first reading.
Thank you very much. Also the subject of significant discussion last week at your budget workshop. The detailed schedules that we reviewed at the workshop were included in your packet. I've provided a summary here with highlights to just show the different categories of the city's levy. As you know, the city does levy on behalf of the Lake Forest Library, which is included in the city's levy ordinance. Here you see the different categories of the city's levy operations, pensions, the capital improvements levy, which we referenced just a few moments ago, those being totaled into the total city aggregate levy under truth and taxation. We then add the library levy for the total aggregate levy, and then the total debt levy as abated and the grand total levy. So you can see that proposed overall is a 4.67% increase over the last year's extended levy. I would just call your attention to the two items that are of noteworthy increases. The capital improvements levy is proposed to increase $557,831 over last year. $500,000 of that is to begin the phasing in of debt service on the police facility bonds. So we typically will phase that in over 3 years so that it doesn't have a significant and immediate impact on the levy. And so we are proposing that $500,000 increase this year to begin that first of 3 years of phasing in that planned debt. The other item is the total debt levy, which is increasing by $315,000 or 11%. That is due to this year being the third phase-in year of the Deer Path Park bonds. So 2 years ago, we brought on a third. Last year, 2/3. This year is the first year that the full amount of the annual debt service is on the levy, and that is that increase. Estimated household impact. So this is a schedule that we looked at last week. I just wanted to note that based on discussion at last week's workshop, we have adjusted the median home market value to reflect current census data, which is an average household of $894,400. So we've adjusted that. That adjustment was not in your packet, but is reflected here, showing that on an average household median home market value of $894,000, the proposed levy would increase the annual tax bill by $171 for an average household for the city's portion of the tax bill, which is about 25% of the total tax bill on a Lake Forest property. This is just a chart that kind of shows the use of property tax levy revenue, what goes to general operating, pensions, park and recreation, capital improvements, library and debt service, and how that compares to 2009, 15 years ago. So you can kind of see how some of those have changed. I would note specifically the increase in the pension levy requirements have been largely a result of the public safety pension funding changes that we've made in the last few years, and also that the capital improvement levy is new. It didn't exist 15 years ago, so that's an item that has improved our pay-as-you-go funding for the 5-year capital improvement program. With that, we have presented the tax levy ordinance for 2024 for your consideration of first reading. Happy to answer questions.
Other questions or comments for Director Holub? Alderman Weber.
Thank you, Mayor Tact. As the Finance Committee Chair, I just want to thank Elizabeth and her team for all of the hard work that they've put in. We've looked at several of these options and had wonderful discussion in our budget workshop last week, and I just want to thank everyone for their thoughtful comments. And as you can see here, we were able to make an update to that median home value. So thank you very much.
Certainly.
Other comments or questions? Okay, and then at this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to grant first reading of an ordinance establishing the 2024 tax levy.
So, second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Levert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walder.
Aye.
Alderman Novit.
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Goshgarian.
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Perfect. The next item on the agenda, which will also be presented by Director Holub, is approval of ordinances abating the 2024 tax levies for various GO alternate revenue bond issues. First reading.
Thank you very much. This is the easy one. So on the previous schedule summarizing the 2024 property tax levy, the debt service levy was presented as abated. What that means is that each year the City Council is asked to consider approval of ordinances that will actually reduce the debt service levy, and this schedule summarizes those for you. The city has historically issued all of its debt as general obligation debt. We take advantage of our AAA bond rating, and we have the full faith and credit of the city's taxing authority to back that, and so we get the lowest possible interest rate. However, there are times at which we issue debt that is intended to be funded from other revenues, not the property tax levy. For example, the 2017 issue was related to water plant improvements, and we fully intended at that time that water revenues would pay for that debt service. So each year you're asked to adopt ordinances that abate or reduce the debt service levy. So here you can see we have 2 for this year. A portion of the 2015 bond debt service is funded from TIF increment related to the development of Kelmscott Park, and the 2017 issue fully paid by water revenues, and so we get to that abated net levy of $3.1 million that you saw on the earlier slide. So presented for you this evening are 2 ordinances for first reading, abating the debt service levies for the 2015 and 2017 issues. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments for Director Holub? Okay, is there anybody from the community that would like to address this issue? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to grant first reading of the ordinances abating the 2024 tax levies for various general obligation bond issues.
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Weber?
Aye.
Alderman Walter?
Aye.
Alderman Novit?
Aye.
Alderman Clements?
Aye.
Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Powers?
Aye.
Alderman Gashgarian?
Aye.
Alderman LaVert?
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. The next item will be presented by Diane Hall, Assistant Finance Director. This will be consideration of an ordinance approving a fee schedule and ordinance adopting a new fee related to liquor licenses. First reading.
All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This evening, included in your packet is a list of the city's current fees. Any changes are highlighted in a different color. Green are for current fees that have been approved but are just being added to the list. Orange are for new fees, and yellow are proposed changes for the fees. This slide just represents a summary of all those different changes. Just a note that the Recreation Department and golf fees are taken to the Parks Recreation Board for prior approval before coming to the City Council for approval. The special event fees, those are for personnel that are assisting with special events throughout the city. These are based on the city's current pay plan. They are the overtime rates with the additional benefits added to recoup some of those city charges. For the water rates, we are proposing an increase to the water customer charge that will generate an approximately $211,000 in additional revenue. This slide just shows the impact in a more detailed explanation on the increases in water rates. The staff is recommending a increase to just the fixed quarterly rate. That's just a very small increase. There are no recommended changes for the consumption. The city's water fund is basically 90% are fixed charges, so staff is continually trying to increase that ratio of more of a fixed rate versus a variable rate. The impact of the changes is for a small and medium residential customer, $12.60 for the year, and for a high usage residential home and a commercial customer, only $21 for the year. So staff is asking for City Council to consider granting first reading of the ordinance, to approve the fee schedule, and adopting a new fee for the liquor license. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there comments or questions for Director Hall?
Nothing.
Hearing none, are there any comments or questions from the public? All right, hearing none. At this time, I'd like to ask for a motion to grant first reading of an ordinance approving a fee schedule and ordinance adopting a new fee related to liquor licenses.
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Walther?
Aye.
Alderman Novit?
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons?
Aye.
Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Powers?
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian?
Aye.
Alderman Levert?
Aye.
Alderman Weber?
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Okay, the next item is from the Parks and Recreation and Public Works Committee, and this is discussion of an approval of a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Board and the Public Works Committee to award the West Park Tennis Court Reconstruction Project to Obsidian Asphalt Paving and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $447,410 to include a 10% contingency in the amount of $44,590 for a total cost of $492,000. This will be presented by Chuck Meyer, Superintendent of Parks and Forestry.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. About a year ago, this was brought before the Finance Committee workshop. We talked about the condition of the West Park tennis courts. Let you know that they were in pretty poor shape. They're beyond their useful life. There's some pretty severe cracking that goes into the base layer of asphalt. We also discussed making sure that the solution to this was done at the highest quality possible. We looked at the possibility of adding another court at that time. And then in the May of this year, came back to you, asked for design funds to get going with that. Just to remind you, we did budget in this current fiscal year for $540,000. We have spent $25,000 on design. We did go with Kapoor and Associates. They worked on the design over the summer months. We asked them to design it with 4 courts. It was determined that it wasn't practical to put more in. There were a lot of limitations with memorials and utilities. So we asked them to design 4 courts, as there are now out there. So the design was for the same location. You can see in the upper right that there are some modifications. We did need to move the lines to the east and to the north a little bit because the existing courts don't have the proper dimensions all around. So we wanted to make sure that they did have the USTA standards. So that's what the design that was brought before us for the approval tonight. So the next step was to have them do the design with asphalt, which is pretty common in this area, and we also asked them to do the design as an alternate with what's called PT concrete or post-tension concrete. So we wanted to be able to look at that method, weigh out the pros and cons and the return on investment. So I'm not going to go into this in too much depth, but up on the top right, that's the post-tension concrete, basically concrete that has sleeves in it with threaded rods. Essentially, when the concrete is poured, shortly after that, they put these bolts on and compress everything together around the whole courts. The idea being that it's tensioned. Over the next few weeks, they increase the tension, and it basically stays that way for the life of the concrete. It does provide a very long-term solution and limited cracking, so that's a plus with tennis courts. So on the bottom, on the right, you can see the more typical way that you see tennis courts around here. That's with the asphalt base on the bottom. That's what we have currently. Obviously, there's a base layer of gravel and drainage, but asphalt with layers of base layer of various different products that go on there, acrylic, paint, all that kind of stuff. So in this area, this is the most common type of tennis courts. The post-tension, very few places do that, so there's not a lot of contractors that do it. Now, post-tension is used for other applications, but for tennis courts, a little bit unusual. Did find that there was one being built up in Walworth, Wisconsin, by chance, just over the border, that was just finished. So it's not unheard of, but we did look into that, and we wanted to bid it that way. So one important note on this, in our research, we were finding as we talked to people about how the best courts are achieved, really it's more about the application, the 5-year application of those surface coats. So as you know, and I'm sure you know, asphalt is gonna crack. And when it cracks, moisture gets down in it, and then with our freeze-thaw cycle, it just expands. Pretty typical of our roads and everything else. Does the same with tennis courts. But with tennis courts, if you can get those top courts replaced every 5 years, which is what we have committed to in our CIP, it's going to extend the life and it's going to give you a better play surface. So the really top level courts that are outside, they do it more than even 5 years. We think it's a good cycle. So that's what we have budgeted for that. So we did bid this for a complete reconstruction. So that does include the removal of the asphalt, the existing fencing, examination of the base materials. We did do cores, but we won't know for sure until we actually take it out to look at the base. We have geotech engineering that will come into play here, and they'll determine if the base is suitable. We did budget for that, so it's part of the cost on this. And then also it will include installation of a drainage system. And that will tie into the storm sewer at the park. So I mentioned the USTA standards. So it does include the expansion of the courts. There is no need for, there is a little bit of a grade on the east side of the courts. Where this is being realigned, it doesn't require any retaining wall or anything like that. So that was good news through the process. So this also includes the application of the new surface, the asphalt or concrete. We bid it both ways. And then installation of nets, the acrylic color top coatings, and then finally fence replacement and a practice wall. So we released a bid in early September, received 5 bids at the end of September. You can see in the center, I'm showing the ones for asphalt that were relatively, the top 3 were relatively close. We like to see that. And then those were for the asphalt, and then you see the one, Abbey, was a little bit more. They were the only company that bid it both ways. And then with concrete, all 3 of the top ones are strictly asphalt companies, so they didn't bid it with the concrete option. And then you can see Abbey and Hellas both bid concrete. So Abbey came in at $942,000, and as you can see, Hellas came in at $1.5 million. So as we looked at these costs, we realized really didn't make a lot of sense to go with this. Not only that, but it was also way over our budget. So a lot of discussion with our staff, and we decided that it was best to move forward with the asphalt courts. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Alderman Novit.
Thanks, Chuck. What's the lifespan of the surface? 5 years, you said?
Okay, so the asphalt surface, 15 to 20 years. If you do the 5-year top coatings, it extends that.
And that's
up
worked
to 20
into
years.
the CIP and into the budget?
Yep,
for-
we have
to
that.
expand this
We
for-
have the top coating every 5 years.
Okay.
We have that. We now have that on all of our courts.
Good.
In the past, it wasn't as consistent. Now we're making sure that every 5 years.
And just to make sure, no pickleball lines on these courts, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Other questions or comments? Alderman
Just
Powers.
real quick, Chuck, on the practice wall, what does that do visually to the park and for the neighbors around there?
There was a practice wall before, but we can put it wherever we want. We are gonna put it on the far east end, on the south side. It is a little bit different than the ones we've used in the past. We've just put up plywood. This is actually a fiberglass, pretty nice surface, so I don't think it'll have any visual or aesthetic downside to it.
Thank you.
Alderman Weber.
Thank you. Chuck, what is the usage of these particular courts? Are we seeing school teams or professional lessons taking place, or is it more just casual recreation play by our residents?
That's probably a better question for our recreation staff, but I'll take a stab at it. I think it's more recreational use. I do believe there is some other use out there, but I apologize.
That's
I
okay.
don't know the exact use, but I think it's more general purpose. I don't think there's any program play out there, but we can check on that.
Well, and I'd like to comment on that because for at least 5 years, those courts have been essentially unplayable.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been much of any use of those courts.
Thank you.
And I'll just jump in to say we did have some preliminary conversations with the school districts when the tennis courts at Deer Path Park were converted to pickleball. The middle school did use those courts on occasion, maybe even the freshman team at 115. So they have expressed potential interest in utilizing those courts more frequently, but more to come.
Great.
Chuck, is the court available for Lake Forest days?
Good question. We did talk about that, and it is our desire not to use it. And as a matter of fact, the planning for next year is already underway, and they've pretty much agreed that they're going to relocate. I think that's where the beer tent and everything is. That won't be on there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment on this matter? All right, hearing none, then I'm going to ask for a motion for approval of a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Board and the Public Works Committee to award the West Park Tennis Court Reconstruction Project to Obsidian Asphalt Paving and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $447,410 to include a 10% contingency in the amount of $44,590 for a total cost of $492,000.
So moved.
Second.
This would be a roll call vote.
Alderman Novit.
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian.
Aye.
Alderman Levert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walder.
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. The next item is items for omnibus vote consideration. So I will read all the items. If there's any item that an alderman would like removed or taken separately, please notify me upon completion of reading. There are 5 items. Item 1, approval of the November 4th, 2024 City Council meeting minutes. Item 2, consideration of a request to waive the fidelity bond requirement in connection with holding a raffle in the city of Lake Forest for the Women's Board of Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital, the Guild of the Church of St. Mary, and Lake Forest College Athletics. Approval by motion. Item 3, approval of a 1-year contract with American Printing Technologies for processing vehicle licenses and parking permits in an amount not to exceed $44,000. Item 4, approval to authorize the city manager to award a contract for tree pruning for fiscal year 2025 to Advanced Tree Care for an amount not to exceed $77,000. And finally, item 5, ratify the purchase of 5 used vehicles for the police department and make exception to the bidding process and authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with Havey Communications for vehicle lighting and equipment not to exceed $40,136. Are there any items that you would like removed or taken separately? Okay. Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the 5 omnibus items as presented?
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian.
Aye.
Alderman Levert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walder.
Aye.
Alderman Novit.
Aye.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
All right, the next item on the agenda is old business. This is for discussion of approval of a resolution for a joint funding agreement for federally funded construction with the State of Illinois Department of Transportation for construction of the Deer Path Streetscape Project, section number 19-00093-00-SW for a local match of at least $1,484,676 and authorize the city manager to execute required agreements and additional paperwork as required by IDOT related to work on this project. This will be presented by Byron Coots and Jim Lockefear.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight, Jim Lockefear was not able to make it, so I will be giving the presentation. No changes to the project since we discussed it at the budget meeting last week. I know Jim went into it fairly in depth last week, so the intent of tonight is to not necessarily go into the numbers unless if there's any questions. As we have federal funds for this project, IDOT requires us to basically have this authorization in order to get onto their letting. So this is simply a procedural requirement that IDOT requires us to do, just due to the fact that we have federal funds. We were originally going to be on the letting in January. As you heard last week, we are pushing that back to March, just due to ongoing coordination with the design. That being said, we decided to go ahead and move forward with this authorization. Just a reminder, we were notified in April of 2023 of the ITEP award of just over $2 million. And as I mentioned earlier, IDOT requires us to execute these prior to bidding. And I think you've seen them recently now that we have several grant projects in the queue, Lake Woodbine, Safe Routes to School. This will be something you'll see more frequently. The local match. So the local match we're showing tonight is a little bit different than what you may have seen last week. So the local match is just under 1.5 million, and that excludes construction, engineering, and water main. So the reason that it's not matching last week is due to the fact that IDOT basically requires that the amount that we get authorized tonight matches the last form that they have on record. So they have a form that's called the PPI, which is Project Program Information, and the last one that we have on file with the state is based off of our budget last year. So the number you see tonight, we realize that it is different. It is lower than the number that we had last week, but we have to do that in order to meet IDOT's requirements. Ultimately, though, that the numbers that you saw last week with that budget, that's the budget that we have available for the project. In terms of construction, ongoing communication with that over the next few months as we gear up with the change in the letting date. We are now looking at an early May of 2025 construction start date, with construction ending probably in late October. And then in terms of the language that you see in front of you, we have had our attorneys review this over the last few months. We've been doing some of these IDOT projects. As we continue to coordinate with IDOT, we may have to revise the language a little bit. But we do believe that the way it's set up right now should be satisfactory based off of the last couple agreements that we've had with them. So with that, I can take any questions.
Other questions or comments? From the Alderman. Okay, hearing none. Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment on this matter? All right, hearing none, we will move on to a request for a motion for approval of a resolution for a joint funding agreement for federally funded construction with the State of Illinois Department of Transportation for the construction of the Deer Path Streetscape Project, section number 19-00093-00-SW, for a local match of at least $1,484,676, and authorize the city manager to execute the required agreements and additional paperwork as required by IDOT related to work on this project.
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Excuse me. Alderman Notes?
Aye.
Alderman Powers?
Aye.
Alderman Kashkarian?
Aye.
Aye.
Alderman Weber?
Aye.
Alderman Walder?
Aye.
Alderman Novit?
Aye.
Alderman Clements?
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. The next item is new business, and under new business, we will be considering a recommendation from the Plan Commission of an amendment to Section 159.154, Personal Wireless Service Facilities Overlay District of the City Code, to designate a site or sites for telecommunications facilities such as cell towers, monopoles, and antennas in the vicinity of Waukegan and Everett Roads for the purpose of improving wireless service in the Waukegan Road Business District and more broadly in the 4th Ward. Before I ask for a motion to table this matter, is there anyone who wishes to make a comment on this matter, understanding that there will be opportunities to speak in the future as more information becomes available? Does anyone from the public would like to comment? Okay. Seeing none, at this time I would like to ask for a motion to table consideration of the Plan Commission's recommendations on the code amendment relating to wireless infrastructure for 120 days and direct staff to engage a consultant to do further due diligence.
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Kashmirian.
Aye.
Alderman LaBerge.
I need to abstain, please.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walther.
Aye.
Alderman Novit.
Aye.
Alderman Clements.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
7 yea, 1 abstention, motion carries.
Very good. So at this time, I'd like to ask the members of the council if they have any other additional items for discussion. Hearing none.
Sorry, Mayor. Are you going to mention anything about the tree lighting?
I wasn't going to.
Okay.
Would you like to?
Well, I was just going to remind the public that the tree lighting's next week. And it's always a wonderful event to support our community and come out and enjoy the good times. I think it's from 3 to 6 p.m.
And that being said, I think the switch will be pulled by a very famous member of the community, so don't miss that. All right, at this time, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are done.
Andy, were you gonna mention that I